meeting is being recorded.
Okay, there it is. I'm seeing the presentation.
Great.
So meeting number 36. I actually thought the last one was 36, but I guess it's this one that's 36. Let's go to the next slide, please. Okay, so we wanted to start with some ground rules. We actually, this is usually the first slide, like in every steering committee, for an NPI planning process. Usually the ground rules slide is first, and I didn't really notice until our last meeting that we hadn't been doing that. So I went ahead and stuck it in here just as a reminder for how we engage with each other, when we have these meetings. Better late than never, I guess, here at meeting number 36. But these were the ground rules that were covered like way at the beginning of the process 3 years ago. And they're all simple and mostly things that this group does for each other already. Allowing room for everyone, letting people talk first before you talk twice. When agreeing, avoid repeating others. When disagreeing, focus on the idea and not the person expressing it. Everybody does a really good job of raising hands and using the chat in this group, so I don't need to remind you of that. And it's always easier to talk to people if they have their video on, so if you're able to do that, please do. Next slide, please. And so here's what we want to cover tonight. There's actually quite a bit, and some of these are pretty meaty topics. So I think it will be, we'll be using the full time today. The first thing's pretty quick. It's reminding everyone of the schedule for the process moving forward. Then, as Yvonne was mentioning, we'll cover some of the feedback that we got from the planning board and have a discussion about that, just to sort of lay it out so everybody knows what happened at that info item 2 weeks ago. Then we'll talk about some of the edits that we've been making to the plan since we met last month. And Chelsea will cover that. I think that'll be pretty quick, but where the discussion items will start taking a little bit more time is with the map alignment process that we talked about at the January meeting. We've been working on that in the time since then, and Fernando will present how that all has shaken out now that we've done that alignment process. And then we'll close by talking about some considerations for the mapping along arterial streets, and then finish up with the next steps. So there's a lot to cover. So let's get started. So here's our schedule, and we're in the part of it now where things get really tight. So we've grayed out the stuff that has already happened. Everything in the black text is still ahead of us, including tonight's meeting. But we don't have a lot of time under our schedule to make final updates to the plan before we need to put it in the planning board packet on the 7th. And then they'll be having their hearing on the 15th. And then that begins the adoption process and city council hearing process, where it goes to committee and then first reading and second reading. So we're really close at this point, really just a week out from when we need to have the updated draft for the packet, and then that whole adoption process starts. So go to the next slide, please. So we did go to the planning board with an information item on the 18th. Info items are just where staff presents a project, and then it's open discussion with the board, and they don't take any action, but they do ask questions and offer opinions and feedback. And so that's what we did on the 18th. We presented to them an overview of the planning process from the very beginning, more than 3 years ago, all to where we are now, and then walk them through an overview of the content in the draft plan. And then they had discussion and asked us questions about it for another 2 hours. So it was a really robust discussion, very long info item, took about 2.5 hours from start to finish. And they did express some concerns that I've documented here on this slide. There was a lot of praise as well for the effort and a lot of the content in there, but they had some concerns that we're a little bit worried about and wanted to talk to the steering committee about. So Some of them are more easily addressed and some of them are more difficult to address. And so the first one, strengthening any recommendations and content on universal design. We think we've already figured out how to address those comments from planning board, and Chelsea will cover that when she gets into her edits that we've made to the plan over the past month. But we think we found a way to address that one. More concerning was feedback that we got from several members of planning board that they're questioning whether the future places and height maps that we have in the draft, if they're diverging too much from Blueprint Denver, or specifically what they're observing is, it seems like instead of redistributing the growth that's allocated by Blueprint Denver, it looks like we're just lowering it more often than not. And that's their concern that they're expressing. I'm not saying that that's accurate or it's something that we agree with, but that's what they shared with us. And there were several members of the planning board that had that opinion. The reason why that matters is because Blueprint Denver has a growth strategy, a citywide growth strategy that's meant to accommodate all of the projected growth that we'll get in the coming decades. And if neighborhood plans lower the ability to grow, and they do that consistently from one plan to the next, the city might be in danger of not meeting the citywide growth strategy. And so that's the kind of situation that they're trying to avoid, and why they're worried about what they observe and are asking a lot of questions about. Are you guys just really lowering the guidance in most places? That was really the main theme of a lot of their comments and concerns that they expressed to us. So this is important because planning board has to approve the plan as the very first step in the adoption process. Before city council ever gets to see it, planning board needs to take action and vote to approve in order for it to move on. And the criteria that they use for that is, there are three of them. That the plan needs to take an appropriate long-term view. It needs to be a long-range plan. The second one is that it was created through an inclusive community process. And then the third one is that it's consistent with the comprehensive plan. And that's the one where several members were flagging the potential concern. That's the one where it would file under, is if they think that we're not being consistent with the growth strategy, or that we've lowered instead of tweaking and reallocating and redistributing, that they may find that we didn't meet that third criteria and that we're inconsistent. That's sort of what we're worried about. So we go to the next slide. So before we get into it, we will later in the meeting get into the substance of those concerns and what we can do about it. But for now, we thought let's talk about how we can express opinions to planning board. And there's like really two main ways to do it. So the first set of bullets is, as an individual, you can come to the planning board hearing. You don't have to physically come. You can join via Zoom. But any individual who wants to speak and address the planning board as they're holding their public hearing is allowed to do it. So the meeting starts on the 15th at 3 p.m. We don't have the agenda published yet, so we won't know where we fall on the agenda. If we're not first, it won't be right at 3, but the agenda will go up a week before the meeting. So like by next week, they'll publish that and we'll know where it checks out in the order. And you can attend in person or via Zoom. You can also register to speak. If you're using Zoom, you can do that in advance and you get 3 minutes per speaker to express your opinion. So as an individual, that's open to everybody. And then the other opportunity that we wanted to run by you is that the steering committee itself could express support for the plan by writing a letter. And we would be able to include that right in the packet on the 7th, alongside the staff report and the draft plan. If somebody wanted to take the lead on doing that, then so long as we got it about a week from now, we'd be able to go right there in the packet and be attached right to the staff report, which would be a powerful way for the steering committee to express their opinion. So I'll pause it there and like take any questions or comments that you might have just about this.
Well, I guess I'll say something. Um, I would be remiss if I did not mention how um, it felt like more of the same redlining. And as I complimented you previously, you and they kept saying big ideas. Big. This is a big idea. We're listening after Black Lives Matter, after living through the most catastrophic pandemic, after people suffering and dying. Change has to happen, and it has to lead with DEI. And I think that you have reflected that. But yet I feel this undercurrent of white privilege. Like, I don't think they understand the suffrage and the pain living in that community for 60 years without a grocery store, without a library, without things that other neighborhoods have. It wears on you. And so unless you live those tragedies, I don't know, it was a weird vibe for me. And I would be remiss if I don't call that out. And so I think you guys have, a huge task ahead of you. So you need our support, and we need to stand strong together, because I think the plan, I think we're just, we're almost there. I mean, I know they said they want density, but they don't promise um, affordable housing in that density. And I feel like, this crisis of housing, it's not just the poor neighborhood's fault. I mean, it's Denver's fault. But now it feels like we're stacking in. But I mean, that's a whole other point. But yeah, I just feel like you all really have your work cut out, and I commend you for trying, because this is a tough board, and I had no idea.
Thank you, Yvonne. I saw some other hands up, but I think they got taken down. Did others want to?
I saw Kathy's, so I took mine down.
Oh, okay.
You can go ahead, Elizabeth.
I can go after.
Well, I guess one of the questions was more on some logistics in regards to the planning board meeting. When you say you can register in advance to speak, but we don't know quite yet where we'll be on the agenda, do you get a sense that it will sort of flow the same way, where you'll have like your presentation to begin with, and then there'll be public comment from whoever is there, and then more of a debate or discussion with the planning board as to whether they're going to forward it or not, or if they're not going to forward it, then what happens then. So I'm just kind of trying to get an idea, because 3 o'clock always is in my work time and my workspace, and so I need to be very conscious about how I can be engaged with this process for the planning board. I know it's an important piece, and I do want to be there and register, but I'll have to do it via Zoom. So I'm also trying to figure out more of those dynamics, and maybe it is more to come later. But speaking to what Yvonne has expressed, is that, yeah, we need to really, I think, stick to why it is important. When we were talking about density and being very deliberate about having a more equitable approach in dealing with density in Denver. And so that is something I think we really need to hit upon more and more about that. And I really appreciated your comment, Cortland, when you're talking about how it's related, and Fernando, to the nodes. And I think that's maybe something more to highlight too. Often I think what we've seen in West Denver is not transit-oriented development, but transit-adjacent development, which is certainly what Heidi has talked about over and over again. And that really doesn't serve the neighborhood to just have a lot of apartment spaces that are out of people's price range, and they're displaced in the process, and they don't really get anything out of it except somebody's got some great income property for down the road. So we're really thinking long view in that sense of trying to keep the stability of the neighborhood intact. I don't know how longer a view you can have by trying to do that. And so I would emphasize those components, and I could certainly see a steering committee support plan that would address some of those things as well too. So anyway, that's sort of some general feedback, and just want to get a better sense on the flow of the meeting. Thanks.
Okay, sure. Well, so the way that it works is, you know, the agenda will indicate like where it is on the order, and we don't know that yet, but we will know by next week. And this is a public hearing, right? So it's different from the info item. The purpose really is to hear from the public, and to not usually have as much Q&A as what we had last week at the info item. That's one of the reasons or 2 weeks ago at the info item, we go there to get a lot of the discussion, you know, out of the way with the planning board, so they can focus more so on the public hearing. So there will be a staff presentation. It'll be focused on the 3 criteria and an analysis that shows that staff believes that the plan is consistent with the 3 criteria. And then the public hearing will open, and then everyone will get their 3 minutes per speaker. And then after that, after everyone's had a chance to speak, is when the board will have their deliberations. And sometimes that involves questions, either of staff or of individual speakers. So there is, you know, a chance that if you sign up to speak and deliver your comments, that there may be some follow-up that might happen. And then after that, then the board closes for their own deliberations, and then they take a vote. And so that's really how it works.
Thanks.
Yeah. So I'd like to ask if, you know, we would like to have formal documentation of the steering committee's support. Is there anyone who would be willing or would like to, you know, take the lead on writing a letter from the steering committee? Because I think that would carry a lot of weight if we're able to attach it alongside the staff report.
I'm happy to take notes from the group now and listen and help draft it. I like the democratic writing. I just want to say again to the planning team, thank you for this whole process and for creating a space where we've been able to dig in some of the most challenging, vexing problems that we have. These are problems facing cities everywhere, but the opportunity to lead on showing how to heal harm and move forward into a future that works well with quality of life centered and equity and vitality at the core is huge. And I listened to all of the conversation. I really appreciate Councilman Torres's office and for sending that on. And I do strongly believe that it's time for us it's felt like for a while, it would be great for the steering committee to be able to come out with a statement of support for the plan and the adjustments that have been made, and make the planning board asked some other questions that I thought were important, like in a 300-page plan, like what are you supposed to focus on? Well, I think the steering committee, I think we need to be able to say, like, what are the big ideas? Yvonne raised a few just now. What are the big ideas that we want to center? And they can find that woven throughout. We know what those big ideas are, and maybe the plan can call it out, but our letter to be able to say what's really important. Some of the questions maybe like said, you know, you've named equity up front from a harm kind of way. Exactly how is this plan advancing harm or healing harm? And I think that's been at the center of all of our conversations, and being able to name in that letter what we see in this plan that is really addressing the harm, recognizing that we have four of the NEST neighborhoods in the plan and more affected. So I don't know, I'm willing to write, but I want to hear what are the big ideas that the steering committee really wants to center. And like CPD plan team, like you did a great job of showing how you were adhering to the overall guidance and doing what a plan is supposed to do of putting right density in the right place. But I think our letter also needs to be really clear that density isn't the solution. Increased density isn't the solution to the affordable housing crisis. There are roots of the affordable housing crisis that are affecting different people differently. I appreciated that Mary Cottington, one of the board members, named that when people say no to massive density increases people who've said no to significant density increases as a way of exclusionary zoning and keeping things small to keep people that aren't like them out, to keep their property values high. And I was glad that she named that was a distinct issue in other parts of the city and that have had clout to be able to do that. Like, this is not that case. This is saying we've seen how density has been applied in ways that amplified gentrification pressure, that haven't delivered affordable housing, and that has created transit adjacent development that hasn't reduced our fuel consumption, hasn't made pedestrian friendly streets, hasn't allowed for universal design, for aging in place, for intergenerational neighborhoods. That's too much of one letter maybe, but I think like the message of it's not, the conversation was very disappointing that it was all just big density. And then I don't know if there's any discussion in this group that we want to have about the affordable housing policy, the affordable housing ordinance, and how things get reflected. But I think this is isn't this the first neighborhood plan that's been passed since that's been adopted?
Yes,
So
it
there are
is,
these
yeah.
spurious arguments they had about like, don't be transparent about how it affects it. It'll be the only plan that shows that because it's new and it should be incorporated. Anyway, when we want density, if it delivers affordable housing, we don't want just density that drives people out of the neighborhood. So I don't know. That was fascinating.
Okay. Well, you'd asked for some feedback, maybe people on priorities, maybe people could put that in the chat if they have thoughts on it now to help Elizabeth with her drafting. And then we do have a lot of other content that we'd like to get to. If we could move on and people use the chat to give her some of that feedback, we could move on to Chelsea's section of covering some of the recent edits in response to the feedback we've gotten. Does that work?
Yeah, I do have one other question about the
Okay, sure.
the inclusive process question. I think this has been an inclusive process. I think I also was very sad that the way that timing worked out, that the first opportunity to re-engage the broader public happened right around the holiday season. And I think the nature of who was able to give public comment and who is incented to give public comment in the period between late November and now isn't representative and isn't consistent across the board. And I don't know, it's a question of, there seemed to be some desire on the board of maybe prompted by public comment to slow the process down. But I have been concerned, like the steering committee members who asked to make sure that the plan was updated to present before going out to the public was in service of an efficient and effective, inclusive public process that didn't exhaust people with a difficult to read plan. It wasn't a steering committee that was trying to hoard power and have a particular plan to push through. The characterization of putting it on the steering committee that we've been like sitting on the plan and holding it was such an affront. And it's been a long process of a lot of good faith commitment to civic process, to inclusion, that I do have a concern about, is it like can we get more buy-in? This plan, as Eugene very powerfully named in the last time he was here, this plan is a beginning. And if people don't own it and aren't excited about it, it won't get implemented, because it only gets implemented by a broad-based community effort to move forward into it. So I understand that we want to get it done. I understand that the council will be changing and that we want to be able to move forward, but I'm curious what to do about how to make sure that we get to have a plan that we know has really strong buy-in, and how can the steering committee help build the strong buy-in for people to be, yes, this is a plan that speaks to us and what we're up to, and we're going to see it through to make sure that it's accountable.
And I think that, for all three criteria, I think that the work that we've done stands on its own merits, and we can, prove that, and we can offer ample evidence of an inclusive process, not just from the last few months, but, over the course of the whole project. And so I think in terms of a slowdown, I think it is possible. I think that could be an outcome of how planning board, reacts to the public hearing. They may say, take some more time with this. We see a few more things you need to work on. They could, slow it down or defer their vote or continue the public hearing to some future date. Those are all possible outcomes. But I think, because I think it stands on its own merit, that we can take it forward at this time. And if they take that action, then we'll deal with that. But I think it would make sense to bring it forward to them and let them make that determination. And so that's how we're proceeding. We're trying to keep the schedule that we've outlined and have had up at all of our meetings for months. And then we'll see what happens. Yeah. All right, so let's move on, because we do have several other topics to get through. Chelsea, you've got the next section, and this will be relatively quick. We just want to highlight some of the edits that have been made. We think you'll be happy to see all of these. So Chelsea, go ahead, take it away.
Sure, thanks, Cortland. Yeah, so as we were just discussing, the last draft plan was released in October, and while we've had a lot of engagement before then, we've since that October draft, we've been collecting feedback from a wide variety of sources, and most of that feedback we presented to you and discussed in our late 2022 steering committee meetings. But here we're going to highlight some of the most significant changes that have been made to the plan since October. Some of those edits were released in the draft plan that was posted online in mid-January, tied to the info item that we just discussed on January 18th. And some of these edits are brand new and will appear in the next draft, which will be released to the public in tandem with the planning board meeting on February 15th. So here's a list of the main sources of our feedback for these edits, all of which have directly informed our revisions to this draft. So I'll cover some of these key edits, and then, except for the maps, and then Fernando will cover the changes to the maps after that. So as you can see here, I'll just highlight a lot of these revisions came from feedback directly from you all, the steering committee. Some of them address planning board feedback directly in the past couple of weeks. Many of them echo the 655 public comments that we've received since October through Conveo and open forums. We've also had conversations with Jean and the Sun Valley RNO and Renee at WDRC and more, but these are the main sources here. So in the introduction, we got some great positive feedback on the inclusion of the historic timeline and the history section in general, along with some suggestions, mainly from you all, on how it could be improved. So here are a few of the improvements. The very first event on the timeline now acknowledges the very fraught history of Indigenous people who lived in West First, including some events like the Sand Creek Massacre. We also added content to highlight Fred and Elaine Ulibarri's contributions to the local Chicano movement And at the end of the timeline, we included a milestone to celebrate the very exciting naming of Ulibarri Park. We also want to be sure you know that we highlight your incredible contributions in the introduction. In the same section as the plan, vision, and guiding principles, you'll find content that highlights your role in guiding the plan and some of your major contributions, such as ensuring that quality of life is the beating heart of this plan, working to integrate equity, ecology, and resiliency throughout the plan. And then we also have the guiding principles right next to this text and acknowledge the steering committee as the source of those guiding principles and link to the Powerful Conversations guide that you all provided us with. As the last highlight in the introduction that we'll speak about today, we created a sidebar to spotlight the Photo Voice project. And in the quality of life section, the desire to expand the tree canopy throughout West came up often, not just here, but in many of our public comments. And we revised the map to do just that and ensure that the recommended areas for an increased tree canopy correspond to the same areas that are most affected by heat islands throughout West. Moving on to land use. We've heard multiple times from all of you about the importance of universal design, and it came up at the planning board meeting as well. So to address this feedback, we decided to include new content on universal design in the land use section related to housing options. And this integration is really meant to highlight that while West desires its housing to be compatible with its surroundings and follow design standards, we don't want that to come at the expense of accessibility. And so in the introduction to the section on housing options, we highlight the community feedback that wants to ensure that accessibility for all people and related to all housing types, including single family, remains a top priority as we consider housing design. So to this end, we've added content also into recommendation L7 to lift up accessibility as equal to design in the title. You'll see that change, and we include content related to this in the background text and then also in new strategies that are aimed at promoting universal design and visitability standards. These next few slides I'll go over pertain to updates to the economy and housing section, and we're really excited about these because we've heard repeatedly from you and from pretty much all the other sources on that list that involuntary displacement is one of the key challenges facing West, and many felt that the draft plan as it stood in October didn't do enough to address this issue. So one of the content updates that we just made this week with support from Renee at WDRC is that we've included this spread in the economy and housing chapter that shares strategies that WDRC recommends. There's a list for organizations and also a list for individual community members who wish to do more to help mitigate displacement in West. And then we also, beyond that, we've developed a new recommendation in the same chapter right next to this spread that focuses on how the city and our partners can better address involuntary displacement in West. And there are multiple strategies included here, many of which are overlapping with WDRC's valuable input. We have a few more changes to this chapter we think you'll like, and these titles on this slide come from the sentiment that also came from multiple sources that the plan didn't do enough to highlight and address the issue of our unhoused community members. So we've added 3 new recommendations aimed at better supporting unhoused people in West. And this includes, supporting programs, expanding and improving temporary support with partner organizations, supporting long-term housing stability for residents experiencing homelessness, and building more access to, awareness of, and support for social services in West. In the plan, each of these policies includes multiple strategies underneath each one, but just wanted to give you a taste of what's in there now. And then for the last edit to this section, we responded to many comments that expressed a desire to attract new community serving small businesses to West as part of achieving more economic vitality and connecting to other needs throughout the plan, like in quality of life, healthy food access. So the strategies and recommendation here for new businesses all relate to that. There are some other edits, but these are really the key ones. And Now I'm going to hand it off to Fernando to talk about recent changes to the land use maps.
Thanks, Chelsea. I'll share my screen so I can point at stuff as well. Let me just do that. I think it's, there we go, right? Now we're all seeing. Okay, cool. So I'll walk you all through kind of those revised the changes to the land use maps that we started talking about on the last steering committee. And I'll provide you some of those details of what we changed and updated. So as we talked about last time, we noticed there were some inconsistency between the maps that we use as the tools. And we provided this example of how in that area in where the star is, if the combination of neighborhood context and future place type usually provides guidance for up to 5 stories, but on the height map, we had a different set of guidance that talked about 4 stories with incentives and 3 stories with base height. So we looked a lot into all these different maps, and we really dig deep into finding where those inconsistencies were to ensure that alignment. The main strategy, as we talked about last time, that we used the height map that was created through this process as the main guide, which resulted in updates to the future places type and the neighborhood context that's needed, that I'll walk through in a minute to create that alignment. And as we
Fernando, I just had a quick question on the last
Yeah.
slide. I heard mention certainly at the planning board meeting to the EHA, and I don't know if we've really had that clarified. I mean, I don't know exactly what that means. Is that something you can explain a little bit?
Oh yeah, sorry. The EHA is the expanding housing affordability, the citywide policy, and that's the policy that I'll talk more in detail of how that works. But it's basically a policy that if you provide more than the required affordable housing units, there's in this case, as it relates to height, there's height incentives in some areas, and I'll walk in more detail to that.
And I'll just add that what Fernando highlighted there is really how it affects height maps. But there's also a component to expanding housing affordability that requires affordable housing if you're building 10 or more units. So it's got multiple different things that it's accomplishing. You have to provide it if you're building a certain number of units, but there's also a bonus in some zone districts of if you go above and beyond and provide extra affordable housing, you can get more building height. And so that's the part of it that we focus on when we're doing height mapping, obviously.
Thanks for clarifying. It'd be nice to see if we can get a copy of that.
Sure, and there's a good website. I'll take a look. It's all explained pretty thoroughly, and I'll put a link to that in the chat.
Thanks.
Thanks for making sure I explained that acronym. So thank you. And so as I was saying, we use that main strategy as using the height map as that guide. But while we started looking into the different maps, there were some changes that were made on the future place types that were intentionally made, that the heights were not updated. So those resulted in some changes to the heights or to the neighborhood context. And then we also double checked the guidance, the current guidance on the West maps, future places and heights against zoning, to make sure that we are in alignment with existing zoning and existing structures and uses on the ground. So we did a lot of analysis to see where those areas needed some alignment. And then I'll walk you through how we made that alignment happen, reflected on the 3 different set of maps that we use: the neighborhood context, the future place type, and then the height. So in terms of updating or updates to the neighborhood context map, some changes that we did, and I'll use kind of the pointer to highlight stuff, but the map on the left, you'll see in this series, is the map in the public draft, and then the map on the right is a updated version that we worked on. So we did a few changes here to the neighborhood context map. The 3 here on the left, sorry, has some lag, my mouse, but the 3 on the left are changes based on zoning that we did. There is existing zoning that needed this neighborhood context to reflect the uses and the height already allowed by zoning. The change we did around the cloverleaf was in order to compound the both sides of the cloverleaf with the whole boundary of the Stadium District Master Plan in order to reflect the plan guidance from that area. And then the change down here is to reflect an intentional change that was made through this process to change that area from in the neighborhood context, a special district, which housed that industrial area, to more of a community center that was on the future places map. Right, and so in terms of following the height map, we had to update some of these future places to align with that desired height that you guys worked on. So these changes here highlighted in these bubbles represent the changes that were made, where we changed mostly from a future place type that was, I think, high medium that allow higher density, to a future place type that was lower in residential density. So in these maps, you can see the ones on the right, usually it's a darker shade of yellow, and then the ones on the right, we align that a future place type with the desired height from the height map. And then there were a few places where we changed this in other direction. So the one on the left, in the draft, on the public draft, there was a local center highlighted on this 2 lower areas, like a light pink. But on the future place type, that was noted, I mean, on the height map, that was noted as 5 stories. So in order for that to talk to each other, we brought those centers more as community centers, which provide guidance for up to 5 stories. And then the one on the north is an area that houses part of that West Ridge master plan process, specifically more that south of 13. So that area, taking a closer look at the West Ridge master plan process and talking to DHA, we noticed that I think we had highlighted one area as community center, but I think it was important to highlight the whole area there south of 13 as community center. And then the last one is that, again, that area of the cloverleaf, that we changed it to match the other area of the Stadium District Master Plan in order to just refer the guidance to that plan itself. And you'll see that reflected on the height map in a little bit more detail. So before I get into the changes that happen in the height map, I just want to kind of walk you through the process that we did. On the left, we have the map that it is on the public draft, the map that you all worked on, that has both the base heights and the incentive heights combined. As we talked about last time, a way to better understand how this base heights and incentives from expanding house affordability work was to provide kind of two maps that talk to one to base heights and one to incentive heights. So what we did first is translate this map into what it would be if we were just showing the base heights. So these two maps are the same, just the one on the left is showing the incentives, and then the one on the right is just showing the base heights.
Fernando, can I interject here for a second?
Sure.
Just to make sure that I'm understanding this. So the incentive offers how many additional stories if somebody takes advantage of the expanding housing affordability provision? Is it 2 stories, 4 stories?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I'll further explain that and provide here some examples. So the way, like I translated this map, and we can go back and forth from this area. So the areas here as this a light gray, if there's 3 stories and you're eligible in the zone district and all the different considerations for that incentives, it allows for 1 more story. So that becomes 4. If you're in an area with a base zoning of 5, it allows for 2 more stories. So that becomes 7. If you're in a zone district with a base story of 8, it allows for 4 more. So that becomes 12. And then if you're in an area of 12 base zone district, it allows for 4. So that becomes 16.
Okay, that's super helpful. And that is only for a project that has 10 or more units being built that will take advantage. Anything less than 10, they pay into the linkage fee, right?
Yes, and I think,
Oh, go ahead.
well, in addition to that, I think that 10 or more units, they need to provide a required number of affordable units or the linkage fee. I think the incentive is once they want to go and provide more than that requirement, they
Okay,
get the incentive as that bonus.
thanks for that reminder.
Yeah. All right. All right, so yes, so we'll use this map here on the right as the base to compare some of the few changes we made, but just wanted to make sure we understand this correctly, because it looks different, but it's the same map. So once we have this map here on the left, that's the one that it's the same map that had the incentives, but we removed them and we just left the base heights. And then the updated version on the right is what I'll walk you through. The changes that we made regarding the height, sorry, I'm trying to move this, sorry. The changes that we made regarding the height, it can be based on 3 different elements. In this slide, I'm showing what we changed in order to better align with zoning. So all of these places that I have highlighted here with a circle are areas where we adjusted the heights in our recommended map based on existing zoning already on the ground or already existing. And I'll just highlight a few places. Some areas here on the San Anthony's redevelopment, we had it as 5 stories, but in reality, they do have some areas that already have a zone district that allows up to 8 or up to 12 in some areas. So we brought that to the height map to reflect that. But there's some other areas that we also brought into alignment, including the Sun Valley area, kind of that south of 13 or south of the Gulch. That area, we had it as 12, but in reality, to bring it more into alignment with the existing zoning and based on the comments that we've heard through Gene and many other people, we brought that more into alignment, and we are recommending 8. based on some of the existing zoning that is in place, except for an area that already allows that 12 in purple. So these areas highlight the changes that we made in the height to bring into alignment with zoning, and some of them increased and some of them decreased. Sorry, let me.
Fernando, Elizabeth is asking why there's not a circle around Westridge.
Around, oh yeah, I'm dividing kind of this talk in different, these are the changes that we based on zoning. And then on the next slide, I'm gonna talk about the ones we did based on the guidance. So there were some areas that there was future place guidance that was not in alignment with the heights, but talking with different previous people on the team and just aligning and analyzing those changes based on the strategy that we have heard here about kind of reducing some of that density along the Gulch, concentrated on the corridors and providing those transitions. These are the changes that we updated the heights to align with that future place map. And that now I'm highlighting that area of Westridge where we had it as 5, but we brought it more into that community corridor, which allows up to 8, but just south of 13. The north of 13 remains that at 5. And then there's some other areas that we also noticed. For example, some here along Sheridan and along kind of close to that Colfax Irving intersection, where in the height map, there was some transition provided, but it was also noted and updated on the future place type. In another area that I want to highlight here after having conversations with Renee, also we brought up kind of Columbine's home we had it as a 3-story base height, and we brought it up to and increased it up to 5. And then just the third area that I want to highlight of some changes that you'll see on this map is these 2 areas where the guidance did not change. The only thing that we change is the symbol to better indicate what is that a height guidance. For both of these areas, we used a hatch to indicate the legend. The first one here, just noting and referencing the Stadium District Master Plan for recommended heights, and just noting kind of the range that they provide in that plan, that is from 5 and up to all the way up to 30 stories with incentives. And then down here in the industrial area, just noting that the way the height is controlled in this industrial areas, it's not using stories, but using a ratio between the area and the floor of the property. So all this changes as a result. This is where we landed in terms of the updates to the base height map. And as you can see, like this is what I walked you through, kind of all the different updates. And then I'll jump into the incentive height map. This is where we were talking about that expanding housing affordability incentive. So you'll see in this map some areas that change from 3 stories up to 4, some areas that change from 5 stories up to 7, and then some areas that change from 8 stories up to 12, and then some that change from 12 up to 16. And as I mentioned before, but I just want to repeat again, I think this map is just illustrating where the different zone districts that could apply based on the different considerations for that incentive height. But as we talked about, this is achievable when a project decides to provide more than the required affordable housing requirement. And this height is also subject to a variety of different considerations as well. And then we're gonna jump into kind of some of the corridor considerations. And I don't know if it'll be better to, based on time, talk about some questions right now or move into all the way to the end.
I would like to ask a couple of questions if we could.
Yeah, I see you have your hand down. Yeah, go ahead, Kathy.
I just wanted to really sort of get a better sense about what you're talking about with those incentives for increasing height if you do affordable housing. So it's not part of the, I'm doing 10 units and I can get more density because I'm doing affordable housing. This is a separate piece, if I'm understanding you correctly, is that you can also get an incentive for height if you're doing affordable housing too, irregardless if you don't do 10. So I could be perhaps doing 5, and if I want to do some affordable housing, I could get additional height. Is that understanding correct?
I think there's some nuance there that I can try to explain better. I think the expanding housing affordability has requirements for every project that builds 10 or more units. So I think below 10 units, I don't think there's that requirement, or correct me if I'm wrong, Corlin, but I don't think there's that requirement, or it's in a different way. But if you do want to, the incentive only applies to those areas where the project wants to go beyond that requirement. So those properties that are required, so 10 or more units. So that's why there's few districts that allow them.
So you're saying that's the main trigger. You have to have 10 units in order to get that height bonus and do affordable housing.
No, it's not.
Yeah.
It's that you have to provide affordable housing. There's a requirement you have to meet that's triggered at 10 units. So if you're building more than 10 units, then some of it needs to be affordable. To get the incentive, you do extra affordable housing or deeper level of affordability to the extent that you get a bonus. And the link that I put in the chat, will give you what those specific thresholds are, but it's not, you don't get the bonus just for doing what's required. You're going above and beyond and doing more in order to earn the bonus.
And it's over 10 units. Like, I think that's the thing that we're trying to understand. It's only available to people building more than 10 units on a project.
Yes. Yeah.
And in connecting that to like the 10 units, also there's not a lot of areas that allow you to build 10 units based on the zone district. So there's few zone districts that even start to allow that incentive.
Following up with that question, then, are you proposing then that this will change some of the zoning in the West Denver neighborhoods to allow more of that to happen?
No, I think what we're saying here, like, this is the base map. The base map that we're showing here, this is a recommendation. And then the incentive map is just trying to depict where, based on the future places and the heights that we're recommending as the base, could allow for that incentive. But yeah, there's no rezoning that will happen in addition to the plan. It's just the guidance.
So the base map basically is the heights that could be achieved without doing anything extra or special for affordable housing. But in some zone districts, your higher density ones, they would be eligible for the bonus if they went above and beyond. So that's what the incentive map shows. And so really what we're just trying to do is be clear about on the base map, here's what you could just sort of, build by right with the corresponding zoning, but you could get a little more in some of these areas if they went above and beyond on affordability. So it doesn't affect the whole area. It's just in the higher density areas where the bonus would even be eligible.
So that would reflect the blue and purple areas mainly?
Yeah, mostly, but the some of the 3-story areas too, the darker gray ones could get 4. So Fernando, if you switch to the incentive map,
Yeah.
4 is the even darker shade of gray. So you see, it's not all of the 3s. It's just some of them that would have the right kind of zoning based on the place type that would be eligible, but not all the 3s, just some of them. That's where it gets even more complicated.
Mhm.
Yvonne has her hand up.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, and maybe this is not the platform, but how is water, if all those people are going into those areas, how, with the drought that we have experienced, how is water going to impact? Is there going to be enough water for all this density for people that are, because I'm seeing all this density in Valverde now, and I'm wondering the impact of, are you guys taking that into consideration, or how is that something that comes later? Like, how is there going to be enough water for all this density for all these people?
Yeah, well, I
My
think that's.
sense is that go ahead, Cortland.
Oh, I was just going to say that the citywide growth strategy, so like the blueprint, big picture, whole city, takes into account the amount of growth that the city can accommodate. And Denver Water has water rights that are like very extensive, even out to the western slope. And so I think that all of that's baked into the overall growth strategy, but isn't something that we reflect specifically, when doing a neighborhood plan. We just sort of follow the citywide growth strategy and try to be consistent with it while refining it in some places, which is mostly what we're talking about here.
Yvonne, I was going to add that probably comes up project by project because we have similar questions around electrification capacity that Excel has to provide, and do they have the substations they need to provide that, etc. A lot of that has been coming up in some of the areas where we've seen the most growth, which is downtown and east of downtown. But I think water and utilities are definitely things that are taken into consideration when we think about major projects, probably not one-offs where you might be replacing a unit or adding an ADU or something like that, but definitely feeds into our larger climate portfolio and what the Office of Climate and Sustainability would be doing to help address some of those concerns.
Right. I see Kathy's hand
Kathy?
up. Do you have another
Yeah,
question?
it's a new one. It's just more of a clarifying question as well, too. So I was looking at, when you were talking about creating a little bit more density around the nodes, I'm kind of wondering, like within Barnum, when we're talking about a downtown Barnum area, and also along the Sheridan area, why isn't that included a little bit more higher density, kind of versus in Villa Park, where we've got more of this single family neighborhood character around Santos Park and along 10th Avenue. Why did that sort of get bumped up? I realize it's maybe more from the Blueprint Denver kind of maps. But I was just kind of curiosity of why that wouldn't be a little bit higher there as well, too.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of part of the follow-up conversation that we'll have on the next section. So I think kind of that consideration for other corridors if there's opportunity for that based on that community input. But yes, I think the refinements and the alignment that we currently worked on was based on the height map that we had as that starting point that we used. So I think that was more based on the results and process up to that point. But I mean, that might be a good segue into that conversation for the considerations on the other corridors. Or if there's anybody that has some additional questions about those alignment between the different maps.
Right. Yeah, I think it'd be good to get into this final section here, so that we don't run out of time.
Yeah.
I was just going to take the first slide here. If you could go to the next one, Fernando. So this is where we kind of take the conversation full circle to where we started with planning board's concerns that they expressed to us at the info item 2 weeks ago. Sort of the situation is that Fernando just walked you through with the place types was that we used the draft height map that was already in the plan as the guide. And the result of that was that in making all the maps consistent, a lot of the place types ended up getting lowered through that process to make them consistent with the heights that were already mapped. And so we do have a situation where planning board already, before doing that, expressed concern about us lowering Blueprint Denver too much. And then part of this map alignment process that Fernando walked you through lowered it still more in some areas, one of the biggest ones being in Sun Valley. And we think that was the right thing to do and is the correct plan guidance, but it also kind of exacerbates the concern that planning board already had before we had done that. And so we are, worried about that situation, although we can stand behind each of these edits and documented the logic behind each of them. The reality is that some of these changes lower it still further from what they saw previously. So they had the guidance that we should be careful about doing that, not lower it too much or look for opportunities to increase it in some areas. And many of the planning board members focused in on the arterial corridors as the opportunity for that. And we have throughout our plan process gotten other feedback that was similar to that. So there was a community survey that was done more like in the middle of the process before we even had a draft plan that identified arterial corridors as being a good place to direct density. The strategy that's in the plan currently, like in the narrative of the plan, says we lower it in some areas, like along the Gulch, in between and distant from TOD transit stops, but then shift that density more towards the node, like at Sheridan Boulevard is the example that's used in the plan draft. But the strategy says that we try to do that, boost intensity at TOD areas or along corridors. And then we did get a lot of comments on the draft plan about increasing development intensity in general. Sometimes they identified the corridors, sometimes they were just saying that was something that they wanted to see. But we do have a large body of comments along those themes too. And so we did see or wanted to run by you an opportunity to maybe make some edits to additional edits beyond what Fernando just walked you through, beyond the alignment, to try to be responsive to some of this feedback. And I'll turn it back to you, Fernando, to walk them through the proposal.
Thanks. Yeah, and I'll just start kind of with this community input from the surveys that I think demonstrate also that strategy that we have been hearing from you all here, which talks about a kind of, I think this was part of the survey, as Corlin mentioned, kind of more mid along the process, which as people, their level of a comfort regarding height and density in these different areas highlighted here on the left. And I think as we have talked about here, there's some preference to keep the heights more towards the existing or middle here to ground in the areas around Perry and Knox Station and around the gulches. And I think that's what we have done through this process and what has been reflected on those future places and height maps. And then I think through this community input too, we see how some corridors such as Federal, there's a high level here at number 5, more than half of the respondents saying that they think Federal could handle some of this higher capacity, such as a picture shown here in number 5, as well as some of that in Alameda in Alameda and Sheridan, showing more of this like area around here, number 5. So I'll walk you kind of through the opportunity that we're thinking through, but I wanted to highlight how kind of this community input, I think, relates back to the conversations that we've had here about kind of lowering in some areas, that being more the area around the Gulch and the Perry and Knox Station, while maybe some of those corridors having more capacity to handle some of that higher density.
Sorry,
And
point of clarification, are those little charts, are they tied to nodes or corridors? I thought it was corridors, but it looks like they're nodes.
I think it's tied to corridors in here. I think
Well,
people were
how would-
asked.
I mean, if I see Colfax Ave and Federal Boulevard combined there, so it sounds like 5 is pointing to, or it was exact same results for both, or it's just the way I read it, it just looks like it's saying that for the Cloverleaf.
Okay, yeah, I can see that. And I can double check that, but I think the way the survey was made was saying kind of treating Colfax and Federal similarly. Like since they're like similar in a lot of ways. So treating them as like in a bucket instead of the actual intersection.
Huh, okay.
But we should double check that and make sure that we're not misinterpreting it.
Yeah, but we'll double check that.
And I was looking at some of the survey responses because they're all online, for one of the surveys that talked about density. This one in particular had a couple different ways of answering the question. It was about maybe Colfax and Federal 1 to 5, but then it asked, where else would you want density? And there was a lot of feedback about corridors. So that might be worth going back and just kind of teasing out how many people said along Federal, how many people said along Sheridan. Like if that's a whole corridor conversation, that might be something to pull out from those surveys.
It's good to know, yeah. We'll do that. And then in addition to that kind of survey information and strategy that we followed, I think I just wanted to go back and note how these corridors were talked about and highlighted in terms of transit capacity from Blueprint Denver, which I mean from Denver Moves, that is also reflected in this plan. And Colfax and Federal both are talked about and highlighted as high capacity transit, this being more of a full BRT that has kind of the same capacity as rail in some sense. And then Alameda has its own category, this being more like on a medium capacity level. And then Sheridan is more of the lower of those 3 categories in terms of the capacity to carry people in transit. So just to remember this kind of categorization and capacity of the corridors as we talk about some of this opportunity for land use along the corridors. So what we have done here is highlighted, we went back and saw and looked for some areas where this corridors based on this community input, based on the understanding regarding transit, could maybe handle a little bit more of this density and this more intensity of land uses. So I'll walk you through kind of some of the areas regarding federal in Alameda and then some along Sheridan. So starting with federal, as I mentioned, I think it's that a high capacity transit corridor that is treated very similarly to Colfax. And in Colfax, we do have some of those areas that are 8 stories and then 5 stories as a transition area, and mostly 5 stories throughout. So the opportunity that we're seeing here is some of these nodes, mostly around a federal in 8, and then federal in 2nd, increasing that to 8, the areas that were 5, increasing those to 8, and then the areas that surrounded that transition that were 3, increasing those to 5. And then the areas in between those nodes, increasing those to 5, similarly to match kind of what Colfax, what we're recommending in Colfax. So mostly a corridor of up to 5 stories, and then with some nodes of 8. And then in terms of Alameda, which is that medium capacity transit corridor, recognizing it might have less capacity than this federal and Colfax, the opportunity that we see here is on the intersection with this other high capacity transit on federal. Maybe that's the node that could handle some of that higher intensity. So the same process here, increasing what we had previously at 5 to 8, and then transitioning those areas next to it from 3 to 5. And then the other area that we talked about here is, as we talked with Renee, we increased that area previously from the Columbine homes, the DHA Columbine homes, from 3 to 5. But maybe there is that opportunity to increase that up to 8 with that transition to 5, next to it to 5 to transition into the neighborhoods. And then in Sheridan, as we were talking about, since that one is out of the 3 categories of transit, that represents the lower carrying capacity of transit riders. We just noted one opportunity area, that being more for the size of the parcel in its connection to Sheridan as well. But the area would be as the same, what we previously had as 5, increase it to 8, and what we had as 3 as a transition, increase it to 5. But you'll note that the areas in those medium and in lower transit capacity corridors, we are leaving as 3 stories. So kind of balancing that area, instead of just changing everything along the corridors to be 3 stories, we're balancing this community input with the understanding of transit in the future along these corridors, and thinking this could be an opportunity to kind of balance that community input as well as the planning and board concerns. Yeah, I think
Shayla had her hand up first there.
Yeah, I was just curious why it wasn't carried up further towards Sheridan along Alameda, if that's a medium capacity transit. Like, it looks like it stops right at Morrison Road.
Yeah, and I think right now that was done just because, since we previously had all at 3 stories, I think we said maybe the medium capacity, the intensity might be better handled mostly at the intersection with that other, with federal. And I think east of Morrison Road right now, I think it's more of a mix of like residential rather than a lot of commercial areas. So that's why we're keeping it right now as in this opportunity as 3. but that's a good question that we could consider.
Yeah, I just think in terms of with the planning board, their concern of it looking lower, that if that's an opportunity to add in, it might be helpful.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks.
Elizabeth's hand is up, I see.
Just want to make sure that everybody else, I'm happy to speak, but if there's anyone else who wanted to speak about it, wanted to wait.
I think it's Kathy there too.
Just you and Kathy so far.
I'll be quick. I love the idea of having increased density along places that will be served by transit, and that can also support local businesses near that transit. And so that's great. But I also am afraid too, because there's a Federal and Colfax are not, I don't know how our Vision Zero is interfacing and whether those are going to be like having intense density of people right on those, if it's going to be safe. And I hope that there's a design recommendation that does allow for that, but I know that I would not want to live right. I'd be terrified to have family housing on either of those streets.
Yes, thanks.
Okay,
Yeah, I think, or you want to go?
No, if you had a response, I was just gonna, there's a lot of hands up, so I was gonna lay out the order. But
No, yeah, I think
were you gonna
I was just
respond to that?
say- No, was just gonna say, yeah, thanks. I think that those things definitely should be considered, and I think as part of a kind of this increased density in like just kind of those elements that you all have talked about, the complete neighborhoods could be incorporated as well. So like definitely like safety and crossings should be one of them.
Okay, and then the order I saw him go up in was Kathy, and then Renee, and then Alexis.
All right, I'll go ahead and comment. I guess when I look at the refined or the recommended refinements, again, what's coming up for me is, I think the purpose of looking at transit corridors or nodes was to really begin to sort of see how those are also tied to transit-oriented development. And without it intertwining with sort of the economic changes that would also be supporting of neighborhood businesses, I don't think that makes sense just to have height, to have affordable housing, and that's it. I think we really need to have much more of an integrated approach to how it ties into creating those businesses that could support reducing the food desert, that are walkable to, that are accessible by the neighborhood. And again, kind of going back to that downtown Barnum as an area of connection of natural sort of collective sort of businesses that are serving the community or to be expanded, as well as the Sheridan and First Avenue area. Again, that seems to be like opportunities that we're missing. And I'm not quite sure if what this is going to do is accomplish the integration of how these can be enhancing business support for the neighborhoods as well, other than just having affordable housing, especially with the incentive program that you're talking about. It just seems like we're going to go to more higher rise buildings and have that effect of just, a real impersonal area to walk in that is not meeting some of the other parts of the plan, or even as Denver moves, or even when we talk about complete streets. So I think that balance still needs to be looked at in regards to those pieces as well. And I'd also agree with the Morrison Alameda area that is not just all housing over there. There is a lot of businesses, in particular with that Mercado, right there, that sort of lets the segue into Westwood. That seems like also a missed opportunity there. I'm also concerned about the parcel size that you mentioned on 6th and Sheridan, of creating sort of this big footprint. But again, what I've been trying to promote and send to you in notes is how can we make that strip area mall or a commercial at 8th and Sheridan more integrated with the Gulch to be walkable and more accessible to the neighborhood. That is a more of a complete economic development package rather than just a large parcel that we can have much more expansive, affordable housing. Again, I think our neighborhoods have a lot of multifamily units, and we're going to end up getting more disparate impacts by having it swing so much more strongly toward this affordable housing incentive with what you have outlined already, versus having a bigger picture, a bigger view of all the city sharing in that responsibility.
Thanks.
Renee?
Thanks for the chance to speak. I think that the corridors approach is really strong, really important. And I think it should be combined with large parcels, because working at DHA, one of the biggest obstacles in creating affordable housing and housing for families is the land, the cost of the land. And so I think large parcels are significant opportunities to add density in a way where the tallest parts can be shielded and they can, from lower density, and they're good opportunities. So I see some of that. But I think also on a corridor where there's transit, where there's any open space is really important too, because to Elizabeth's point, there's going to be families in some of this housing. And I think just at intersections is not the only places. So, going west on Alameda, there where the Gulch crosses is an important area. I think right in there. I think those are large parcels and they have transit and they're on open space. I think going north at First and Sheridan, where looks like there's some large parcels, like also creating, the ability to walk through the neighborhood, not just to have transit, is important. So I'd love for those to be considerations. And I had a question about, just ADU incentives. Those are ways to add housing and prevent tearing down other houses. And just so I wasn't clear how that was incorporated.
Yeah, thanks for those comments. And I think in terms of ADUs, I think we're following kind of that citywide guidance. And I think starting with recommendations that allow ADUs where they're currently not allowed. And I think that's something that it's currently being worked on, right? Correct me if I'm wrong, Corlin, but I think that
it was done in Councilwoman Torres's district, and it's in process right now in Councilman Clark's within the West area.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay. Alexis.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Alexis with Colorado Jobs for Justice, and I've had the opportunity for the past 7 months to talk to folks in West Denver and what their needs are. And the focus has always come back to affordable housing in West Denver. And so I'm not going to use the language of corridors and parcels because that's not what everyday residents in West Denver use. But I think there's a good direction in terms of what the current version of what is recommended along the places where there's higher transportation and higher density. And so I think for the folks that I've talked to in organizations, members in West Denver, they would definitely support this recommended version of higher density in these particular areas, although obviously some of them would say that there could be higher density in other places that have not been touched. But they understand that there's also, you know, this is based off of other studies and other recommendations from other reports, and it's all a little bit complex, and we understand that. So, but in terms of like not having any higher, because in the previous slides, we also went from, I noticed that we went from high medium residential to low medium residential in certain areas. And so I'm also wondering, like, if this recommendation, you know, falters or is not, doesn't go through, like, where else then should we at somewhere in West Denver, where should we have those higher density areas? And yeah, that's all I'll say for now, because I know we're also over time. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, Elizabeth?
I don't know if we don't need to go here if it's not appropriate, but I can't, I appreciated the new unhoused sections. I'm curious if there's anywhere in the plan that addresses the complex set of issues along the W line, along the Lakewood Gulch. We've talked about those in the past, but I can't remember why we restricted density around the gulch, but we have a lot of unhoused population in the gulch. We've talked a lot about a sense of unsafety at transit stops on the W line, and we talked about the problem of, like, you can't have transit oriented development with chained, like, you can't locate businesses along the gulch very well because of the way the traffic patterns work. So I mean, that's why I love the other corridors where we'll have BRT and it can really support local economy there. But I wonder how to have eyes on the park and have eyes that are around the transit stations in there too. And I think other folks had good reasons for not having as much density along the gulch. I just don't remember what they are.
Yeah, well, Jaime, could I call on you? I remember you having a pretty good, in previous meetings, a pretty good grasp on the history behind that.
Dealt with equity and looking at how especially the ecology and the environmental justice discussions that we had, I didn't really understand what those meant at first. And then as they overlaid with tree canopy and equity with parks, you know, it's like, it's recognizing that if, you know, I'll take Villa Park, for example, we wouldn't have any parks if we didn't have any gulches. There's no parks that are not gulches here. And so it was really providing those feeders to remain, that feed, especially from the south side of the gulch into the W line. But what also was kind of abandoned was that it was lining piece and the ecology piece, but also looking at the opportunities to create overlays that would actually address the first parts you were talking about, where it was looking at, we were looking at Perry specifically, right? To say, can we incentivize, you know, with an overlay somehow that would allow us to increase that density with a very specific like, it's like, well, we can't tell people exactly what to do, but it was, that was the basis behind that. And especially that, you know, being a transit center opposed to being transit adjacent, was very much part of that conversation as well. So it is, you know, it does look funny and less, but it was done with a lot of thought. Right, in these 3 years, including, you know, the discussions we had to have that summer of 2020. It really changed the dynamics on how we thought about, you know, where to end. I think that's what's kind of the basis of where that came from.
And just to add to that, I also think it was related, you know, to the open space to be able to see and make it accessible as parkland, but also to tie into the neighborhood compatibility. You know, what was mentioned certainly with the Perry and Knox stations is that they're not big drivers on major, you know, rapid transit routes or high volume bus routes. They are a lot more smaller. In fact, I don't even think Perry even has a bus that goes through it. It's just a north-south bus. It just has an east-west light rail corridor. So I think that neighborhood characteristic compatibility and consistency needs to be looked at in those two areas, especially as it relates to preserving the possibility for ADUs. So again, that allows for that increased stability in the neighborhood if people are able to stay in place.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think based on kind of the comment or the alignments that we worked on, and I think some of the changes were made to, I think, intentionally to, especially I think along Perry and Knox, to do them more of that a community center rather than just residential, that could allow for some of those uses that a neighborhood serving uses in those areas next to light rail. So that's just like more of a use rather than a height, but that's another component that I noticed.
Okay, I don't see any more hands up, and we are about 15 minutes past our time. We just had a couple of other slides that we wanted to cover. It's really just revisiting the next steps. Could you advance that, Fernando? Sorry, it's maybe not updating for me. Okay, there we go.
Is it updating for everybody? Or is it my?
I just saw it, yeah. There's a lag.
Okay.
All right, so this is how we started the meeting. We've now had the steering committee meeting. Our next step is the updated draft for the planning board due next week. And then the planning board public hearing on the 15th. And that's really the next huge milestone. And if you could advance one more slide, we just wanted to put this information up here again. If you didn't jot it down before, we really just want everybody, regardless of their opinion or what comments they're going to make, everybody please come to the planning board public hearing if you're able, and make your voice heard. And in addition to that, if you can't come to the meeting because of work or other reasons, there is on that link, denvergov.org/planning board, there's an opportunity to submit comments to the planning board. You can click on that button. And so if you can't come, you can provide written comments as an individual as well. So yeah, please check out that website. You can register on the Zoom there, leave a comment, see where it is on the agenda, all that information. So just wanted to reiterate that opportunity. And that was it. That was all we had for you this evening. Thank you so much, everybody, for all of your dedication and work on this plan. It's 36 meetings is no joke, and we very much appreciate you and your contribution to the process.
Oh, who's counting? Thank you for your time.
Appreciate y'all.
All right, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.